Okay, so I've got beside me here the Ollie's Bargain Outlet flyer for this week. Ollie's has a slogan, good stuff cheap, and I'm searching this flyer for shares of Stronghold Digital Mining, which from my perspective represent the very best quality of item, right, for a very, very cheap price, at least based on this about $70 million market cap, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, I understand there are those out there, right, who feel quite certain that the more accurate stock price for Stronghold Digital Mining is zero. And you know what? We will find out soon enough which of those two outcomes is going to come true, right? Stronghold Digital Mining will either fall to zero or it will soar to prices that will shock the market, that will completely astonish a lot of observers who have persistently and consistently claimed that this company is absolutely finished, that it has no future, and that it's 100% without a doubt done. So we'll see. We shall see. And you know what? I will be the first to congratulate those who are proven right to the extent the company's share price goes to zero. I'll say, you know what? You were right and I was wrong. Congratulations. I hope you shorted the stock. But you know what's funny? I get this impression that there are a lot of people who really dislike this company, yet have not taken a financial position, right? Like they haven't really taken a short position, right, to benefit from that belief, which I find interesting because if a person feels very passionate about something one way or the other, it just seems like the logical next step is to have some skin in the game and to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go all in on shorting this name. I don't know how I would sleep at night knowing what I know about the potential this company has to surprise to the upside. But hey, amongst those who are equally as convinced that, you know what, this company is going to surprise to the downside. Stephen, how can you sleep at night being long shares of Stronghold Digital Mining when you can wake up tomorrow and discover that this company's done, it's finished, it's cooked? So we're going to find out. And as I said, I'm very gracious in congratulating those who have been proven by the market to be correct. And hopefully some of those individuals will be equally gracious in saying, hey, you know, Stephen, I got to give you credit. I disagreed 100% with you, but you were nonetheless quite persistent and congruent in your stating that you believe that Stronghold Digital Mining has a phenomenal future. Speaking of that potential phenomenal future, which I'm convinced it does have, I'm looking at hash prices right now of about 7.5 cents. Yet again, we're seeing hash prices that are really, really looking good. Price of Bitcoin has been hovering in that $34,000 to $35,000 per coin range, but we're starting to see a sentiment shift of another kind. We're starting to at least see more of a, what I would describe as like a broad-based market rally, right, that has taken place over the past several days. And we're starting to see a perception emerge, whether rightly or wrongly, whether, kind of on the early side, or maybe this is like the perfect timing, a perception that the Fed, meaning the U.S. Federal Reserve, is potentially done tightening. They're not going to raise interest rates anymore. That's the perception. And so we're starting to see like the ramifications of that perception work its way through the markets. I think from a purely functional standpoint, it becomes, or political standpoint even, it becomes very, very difficult. I mean, I'm imagining myself as a, say, the Fed chairman, right? And I'm actively thinking to myself, all right, we're going to have a committee meeting. We're going to all vote to decide whether or not to raise rates or leave them the same or potentially lower rates. At what point do I, as somebody acting in that capacity, right, with tremendous responsibility, at what point do I feel as if though I need to play ball with the government, meaning the U.S. federal government, who, right, are showing no signs whatsoever of attempting to shrink any budget deficits, right? These are deficits as far as the eye can see, which kind of by definition means, well, more money is going to have to be like borrowed, right, to keep government functioning. And then that kind of then starts to put pressure on me in my hypothetical role as Fed chairman or a Fed governor to say, hey, do I need to throw the federal government a lifeline, even though we're an independent agency? Just from a practical perspective, do I need to throw them a lifeline? Because, at roughly 5%, like the interest on the national debt, slowly but surely, as that debt rolls over, the amount of money that goes towards paying interest on the debt becomes absolutely catastrophically astronomical. See what I mean? So will there come a point where it's like, man, I think I'm kind of scared, and hey, now the federal government or elements of it are starting to point the finger at me here in the Federal Reserve and claiming, hey, I'm the cause of all these financial problems. Me, right? Like, hey, look, let's switch hats for a second. If I'm a member of the federal legislature and I'm running for re-election, I might be inclined to say, I have no control over interest rates. It's those people over at the Federal Reserve. They're monkeying with interest rates in a way that isn't helpful or useful, and it's costing you money, and it's creating problems for us in the federal government, who, after all, are merely attempting to do what's best for you, the citizen, for whom I'm asking for your vote, right? So I think it's probably from the perspective of a Stronghold Digital Mining shareholder, right, as somebody who co-owns a part of the business, to think, yeah, to the extent the Federal Reserve has been acting responsibly, for how much longer can they act responsibly? And does there come a point where, even if like I might privately feel as if though, rates have to be higher for longer, in fact, they might even have to be even higher than where they're at for longer, does there come a point where it's like, hey, I don't have a Secret Service security detail, I don't want the disgruntled masses showing up at the door of the Federal Reserve building where I happen to work, and it's like they're protesting, that I and my colleagues have raised interest rates, and that we're to blame for any number of maladies within our economic system. That's a very tangential way of saying I think the market appears to be signaling that rates going up is probably done. And I mean, once we do get a bona fide actual crisis, or the bottom drops out from the economy, so suddenly tax revenues aren't as much as had been forecasted, yet of course, federal spending is to the moon, right? That never really seems to change, which is fine, whatever. I'm not critiquing it. It is what it is. But then, you're really going to have some huge deficits. And then what if on top of that, the appetite for U.S. treasuries just isn't there, right? Does the Federal Reserve have to step in to start buying U.S. government bonds, as it has done in the past? What if the Federal Reserve is not just the buyer of last resort, but really the only buyer? So you're essentially monetizing the debt. You're expanding the money supply. I mean, that's by definition inflation, isn't it? Does inflation ever really go down from here, absent like some really painful, challenging, just really, really tough decisions by our leaders? I don't know, because I'm not an economist and I'm not a professional market prognosticator, nor am I an interest rate observer or a Fed, whisperer, so to speak, or somebody who can kind of read between the lines as it relates to government policy. I do think any of us, right, that look at, the past, though, I think what we can probably feel some level of comfort in knowing is that, hey, throughout history, there's been a tendency with practically no exception, to just kind of print away the value of a currency. And it's not necessarily done for ill motives. That's certainly, the intent is not to do that. It's not a malevolent plan of any kind. It's just the way things happen. So that brings us to Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin going to live up to its full potential as a sort of, gold with a very high beta, that moves around a lot? As I've said before on these broadcasts, I don't know that gold has to go away. I mean, there are some Bitcoiners that are like, you know what, forget about gold. Gold should go to zero, and Bitcoin should suddenly have a 12, or $13 trillion market cap. And I don't know. I don't see that happening, but I do think it's fair to ask, would it be appropriate for gold, or rather for Bitcoin, to have a, maybe a more constructive 2 to 3 to maybe $4 trillion market cap instead of the market cap it has right now, which is sub $1 trillion, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, we can look that up really quickly here. We'll go to coin market cap, and let's see what the Bitcoin... Yeah, $675 million market cap. I mean, it's that's not a lot for something that has been described as, gold version 2.0, something that has been described as this transcendent store of value, something that has been described as the internet of money, or words to that effect. I mean, when I hear words like that, when I think of that type of marketing, so to speak, I think, wow, that thing's got to be worth what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trillion dollars, right? But then you look and you're like, my gosh, 675 billion. I mean, that's still a lot. Don't get me wrong. It's certainly a lot compared to 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, right? But here we are at this inflection point. We are truly, I believe, at an inflection point. The next 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 months are going to really, really be interesting. We know the Bitcoin halving is going to arrive. Whether we want it to or not, it's coming. And it'll be very interesting to see if between now and then something fundamentally breaks in the U.S. economy. Something gives. There's, a tremor that turns into a very, very significant earthquake. And bear in mind, I am not hoping for or wishing for any of this stuff. I'm really not. And I've said this before. But it feels like we're skating on very, very thin ice. I see a lot of numbers that would point to a booming labor market constantly being revised. I see a lot of companies that are starting to fire people. There's no nicer way of saying it. I could say they're downsizing. I mean, but let's keep it real. They're firing people. So I'm not convinced that we are living in some wonderfully robust, immortal economy that is somehow impervious to a recession. Quite the contrary. I see an economy that seems to be gripped by inflation that remains very persistent. Inflation that arguably even distorts some of the GDP, or gross domestic product numbers, right, that we see coming out, right, that suggest, hey, consumers are spending a lot more money. Yeah, man, I'm spending a lot more money because everything costs more. Like, hello? I mean, and what's all this about? We're not going to count energy because it's too volatile, Housing, all that stuff's too volatile. We're not going to include that in any sort of meaningful, inflation numbers. Well, in the world I live in, right, you got to buy energy, right? You got to buy food, right? I don't know how those things are avoided except within this kind of highly, almost like virtualized make-believe world that a lot of economists use to then come up with numbers like, hey, this is what the inflation rate is like. I think you intuitively sense this as well, right? That there's just a lot of BS out there. And then it's like, why? Why can't we just have like honesty about this stuff. But then again, if I place myself in the role of, say, an aspiring legislator, right, or somebody who's perhaps sitting in office, I want to have tremendous empathy for my constituents. Yeah, prices are out of control. Those companies, they're just jacking up prices, right? Let's blame companies. Let's blame corporations. Don't blame me. And maybe the fact that I personally voted to increase all kinds of spending, because after all, look at, on the one hand, if I come to you and I say, hey, I've got all these really cool things I want to give you, right? I want, as your legislator, for you to feel as if though I'm out there working for you and bringing home the proverbial bacon, right? Hey, look at all these cool programs I have just for you. But then it's like, hey, and I'm not going to raise your taxes. But then there's this other tax, kind of called the inflation tax, which everybody gets taxed with, right? And then you come complaining to me, hey, like prices are too high. Well, I think it's expedient for me to perhaps say, well, you know what? I will chair a committee to look into corporate practices as it relates to price gouging and price hikes. Those greedy companies, we're not going to let them get away with it. Or alternatively, maybe I'd say something like, I hear you. And, the cost of borrowing is so high. At the Federal Reserve, they're the problem. Very rarely, it would be very, very difficult, I think, right? As an elected legislator, and I have tremendous empathy. It's a very difficult job. Like, how do I look at you and I say, hey, you know what? I'm the cause of your problems. And it wasn't intentional. I'm trying to do the best I can. And I think I voted for stuff, right, which ultimately has contributed to a bunch of bad stuff that wasn't originally my intent, nor was it the intent of my colleagues who comprise this legislative body, right? Who ostensibly is here to represent the will of the people. It's very complicated and it's very challenging. So I don't know that any of that's going to change. And that's, I think, a very safe bet. If you say to me, hey, Stephen, you know what, we can have a principled debate as to whether or not Stronghold Digital Mining, if their shares are going to go to zero or if they're going to soar. Okay, fair enough. But can we at least agree that the behavior of various entities, right, within, be it government, right, be it agencies, fill in the blank, I don't think that those habits are going to change. If you look at a 30, 40, 50-year chart of the way in which various fiscal trajectories have been going, it would be really, really brave to want to bet that that type of behavior is just going to change automatically. Yeah, a crisis, a real legitimate crisis might cause there to be some significant soul searching and some upheavals, right? But absent a crisis that can't be contained or managed or inflated away to a degree, things are probably just going to keep going on the way they've been going on. And that, I think, ultimately is the biggest bullish case for Bitcoin. In other words, nothing really dramatic has to happen for Bitcoin to do super well. All that has to happen is for the same thing that's been happening for years, year after year, for that stuff to just keep happening. Governments, well-meaning, decent governments, spending more money than they bring in tax revenue. Let's just assume that's going to keep happening. Let's likewise assume a very well-meaning Federal Reserve will attempt to help, right, by monetizing debt, by, playing with interest rates. Let's just assume that's going to keep happening as well. At some point, though, as well-intended as all of those efforts are, things happen. Markets shift, sometimes very quickly. And to the extent you're a believer in Bitcoin, I think we both can agree, right, that there's a very, very fertile landscape out there for Bitcoin to surge significantly higher than where it is right now. And in so doing, pull not just shares of Stronghold Digital Mining along with it, but really just about every company in the publicly traded Bitcoin mining ecosystem. Provided that the company, you pick which one, is able to stay in the game long enough to see that happen. So at this juncture, when we talk about is Stronghold Digital Mining going to soar or is it going to zero? In the short term, the game plan, right, has to be let's stay in business. Let's stay in the game. Let's see, because we believe, probably universally, you and I, right, that Bitcoin has tremendous potential, especially in the environment that we're in right now. And if we believe that, then, Stronghold doesn't have to perform miracles. They just got to stay in business, which that's a big part of what I'm betting they're going to do. Stay in business to see that next Bitcoin bull market, which I believe is going to be unlike any Bitcoin bull market we've ever seen before. Okay, that's going to be all for today. I'm not sure if these broadcasts are going to return next week. Or to the extent they return, it may not be quite as consistent as it's been generally, because I'm hard at work on this manuscript, right? I'm participating in National Novel Writing Month. I'm making very good progress, but it's grueling. It's extremely challenging. It's really hard stuff. This is not easy, at least not for me. So anyway, with all of that said, let's stay positive. Let's be great, and we'll see each other again, maybe next week.